I don't think we were quite complete with the conversation that we were having about the Aiyuk and Deebo situation. And if you're just joining us, I've sort of admitted that watching the Netflix doc Receivers has changed my perspective on what the 49ers are doing and what they should do with regard to the Aiyuk situation. Going a little deeper into this, realizing how far over the cap the 49ers are in projecting going forward, not this year, but next year, already knowing that a Purdy extension is out there as well. And watching and listening to players talk about why they went through that 3-game losing streak last year and how both as their offense sets up its game and as a tone setter for the entire roster, the importance of Deebo Samuel, I feel, has been diminished in recent conversations about just sign Brandon and then cut Deebo after the year, which was, my point too. That's been my opinion. And I have changed my opinion. I think that Kyle Shanahan thinks that Deebo Samuel is a much bigger headache for opposing defenses, and I don't think he's prepared, even after this year, to just move on from Deebo Samuel. And also tucked into this is the fact that they don't really have to pay Brandon Aiyuk yet. I know some people consider it not great business, but they don't have to pay him just because he wants to be paid. They don't have to do that.
No, they don't have to do it next year either. They can have him play in his 5th-year option, and then they can elect to have him go out into free agency, and they can get a comp pick, which will probably be a 3rd-round pick in the following draft the year after, which would be the 2026 draft, if they want to go that route. The one thing I still get stuck on in this conversation is the idea of the Niners paying 2 receivers more than $20 million. I don't think that they're going to do that.
Agreed.
I don't think it makes sense for them to do that. And then I think about the difference between the two players. Brandon Aiyuk is a better wide receiver than Deebo Samuel, but Deebo Samuel is probably a better football player, at least as it pertains to the Kyle Shanahan offense. And I think about the offense a lot and what all these pieces mean. You've got a tight end who is an elite blocker, who's also a great pass catcher, a running back who can play out wide, he can play in the slot, he can catch it out of the backfield, we know he can run, a fullback who can play some tight end, he can catch the ball a little bit, he doesn't run it much, but he's an elite blocker, and he knows the scheme. Deebo Samuel is a multi-threat, and then you have Brandon Aiyuk, who's just a very, very good receiver, and he would be in any offense. So I think about all these pieces, and what most of them have in common is their versatility. Brandon doesn't have that versatility. It's not to disrespect him, because most wide receivers don't, but all those other pieces, George and Kyle and Christian and Deebo, they all have the multi-positional flexibility within this offense. So as you start to think about value, Deebo in this offense has more value than Brandon Aiyuk does, just based on the ability to replace him.
Yeah, I also think about the history now. I can't speak directly to whether or not this is like a big issue or not, but think about the history of Kyle Shanahan with these two players. It was the worst kept secret in the world the year that the 49ers drafted Deebo Samuel early in the 2nd round. Everybody knew Kyle Shanahan was infatuated with him. Thought, wow, what could I do with this guy in my offense? And it's been brilliant. And Deebo, though injured at times, has been a very consistent high performer, an important player for a long time. Brandon Aiyuk is really, really good. He's also 2 years removed from the doghouse. I don't know if that factors into all of this, but Deebo Samuel in his career arc has been a much better fit. I know he came in, out of shape one time, what have you. I'm sure there have been frustrations with all players. I'm sure that happens. But this has been a much bigger home run through the long haul with Deebo Samuel than Brandon has, even though Brandon is now 2 years as a 1,000-yard receiver. And last year really, really popped with a full year with Brock Purdy at quarterback. None of this is to diminish Brandon Aiyuk. None of this is to say that he's not worth the numbers that he wants. It's to say two things. A, I don't really understand why the wide receiver market has gone the way that it has. And I'm betting that the 49ers look at it that way too, where they're like, you're right, Brandon. Based on these other contracts, you're worth 28. Here's the problem. We think those contracts are stupid. The Dolphins have Tyreek Hill and gave Jalen Waddle 28. Good luck. Good luck stopping somebody. Good luck having an offensive lineman who's good. The Dolphins don't beat good teams. So they can spend $58 million next year on their wide receiver room if they want. We don't want to do that. We think that that's dumb. And then the second thing I do think that the 49ers think is that Deebo is a bigger part of their offense than Brandon is. And those two things both scream the same thing, which is do not pay this guy a massive extension.
Yeah, and the third piece is what I've always talked about with this offense is the fact that they were 32nd in football, dead last in pass attempts. I don't believe that Kyle Shanahan wants to have an offense where they throw it 35, 40, 45 times. I don't think that that fits the way he was raised. Mike Shanahan made his bones with great running backs and a great running game and a very good quarterback as well, but you didn't ever want to go out there and throw it all over the park. And we can go back to his days in Atlanta as an offensive coordinator, and you had Julio Jones and you had Matt Ryan. So you were in a situation in a dome where you were going to throw it more than you are now. And I look at the way they employ their tight end and the way they use their fullback and the fact that they like to draft blocking first wide receivers. I think that this is always going to be a run-first offense. So that leads me to think about Kyle Shanahan wanting to pay $55 million in the wide receiver room. It doesn't make sense for me.
You and I were listening to a piece that Kay Adams put on social media a couple of hours ago with an idea that maybe the Niners could approach Brandon with this and see if it would placate him a little bit. Again, he is slated to make $14.1 million this year. That is more than he's made his entire career in his first 4 years. So, A, that's not chump change. But B, if the 49ers are well over the cap already for 2025, and they need to start thinking about a Brock Purdy extension, and they've now got Ricky Pearsall, and they don't want to pay two receivers. But Brandon Aiyuk is really upset and does not want to come in for just his fifth-year option. What if the Niners went to Brandon, because they do have cap space this year, and they tore up the $14.1 million option and said, let's just make it a one-year deal, but let's make it worth a lot more. As much as double it. They have the cap space to do that this year. There's whether 28, 25, whatever.
In 30.
I mean, let's
1 year, $30 million.
1 year.
Yeah.
1 year. And then we can revisit this after the year, because then you get a bunch more information. You're all in on Super Bowl year. Maybe Brandon is a little bit happier, but also still incredibly motivated. Let's see physically how Brandon holds up. Let's see how Deebo holds up. Let's see how Ricky Pearsall looks. You're going to get all kinds of information over the next 6 months that you don't have now, and you can add those into conversations at that time. I don't think that's perfect for Brandon. I don't think that's what Brandon wants. But again, I'll keep stressing to people, Brandon is optionless right now. He's done a great job of making everyone think he's got options. I'm going to go play with Jaden Daniels. No, you're not. No, you're not. And you're not going to sit on the sideline and not get $14.1 million in a year of service. Like, there is no scenario outside him being traded where Brandon doesn't suit up for the Niners this year. He might be all upset about it, and I expressed this last week. That's the part that worries me, is Brandon. I don't know if Brandon is going to handle all this well. Is he going to say the right things after games? Is he going to mess up the chemistry in the locker room? I don't know.
Is he built for this?
I don't know if he's built for this. I'm not worried about the 49ers at all. They've got a great team and hold all 52 cards when it comes to them and Brandon. So that's my only concern. And the idea she brings up, it's an interesting one.
It is.
I don't know if it will resonate with him or not.
It's almost unheard of. You don't often see that, where you take a player and you rip up the fifth-year option and then you give him a one-year deal after that fact. Usually you do that and you give somebody a long-term deal. But if they don't want to pay two receivers more than $20 million a year, and if they really are sold on having Deebo beyond next year, then it comes down to that point. And maybe, to your point, or Kay Adams' point from the Up and Adams podcast, if you give Brandon 1 year and $30 million, let's just say, and it's fully guaranteed, so he gets his 30, and he goes out there and he plays well, it does become a little bit of, receiver survivor, where at the end of the year, if you've got Deebo making about 28, Pearsall's a rookie trying to make his way, and if Aiyuk's on a 1 year deal for 30, at the end of the year, if you don't win the Super Bowl and you realize somebody's got to go, then you have a decision to make. And, you probably let Brandon go be a free agent. You keep Deebo or vice versa, and you figure it out from there.
How did this happen? Like, how did this wide receiver thing happen? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it happened because I think it's a little bit of the fantasy football-ification of the game, where the wide receiver now has become what the running back used to be, which is now the receiver is the star. The quarterback is always the star. We know that. But it used to be, you got to have a good running back. If you have one of these elite running backs, you've got a chance. And then you realize the shelf life is about 4 or 5 years for the running back. We'll see about, Baltimore this year with Travis Henry, if he can still do it at the age of 30. But then it became the receiver. You got to have an elite receiver. And so they started getting the mad money. And I wonder if that market doesn't plummet here in the future.
But who looked at that when you said you got to have an elite receiver? Who watched the playoffs and came away with that opinion and kept agreeing with it? Because no, you don't. No, you don't. You don't.
You really don't. But a lot of teams still think that, or they pay like they do.
Like, it's not a bad thing. You know what I mean? Tom Brady, when he wins with the Bucs, he's got Mike Evans. He's got Godwin. It's a hell of a receiving core. Sure, the Chiefs won one with Tyreek Hill. We know that all too well. But
the Rams had Cooper Kupp.
Yeah.
But they didn't. I don't even know who their other receiver was.
Cooper Kupp even Cooper Kupp yet? I don't even know if he had. I got to look. That year.
That was his incredible year.
That was his incredible year?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That was his breakout campaign. The Eagles won with Nick Foles and whatever the hell's going on at wide receiver. Not much. I know we're going back a little ways with the Patriots
last year,
thing.
The Chiefs, they won it with a rookie, Rashee Rice, and not much else.
Who hadn't even emerged as the number one wide receiver until halfway through the year. So I don't really get it. They're good. They're important. I'm not saying they're not important. They're very, very important, as all players are. But this idea that we've got you're paying a receiver more than Nick Bosa and Aaron Donald? That's crazy to me.
Well, maybe that's true, but maybe it's only true if you have a Tom Brady or a Patrick Mahomes and you have the greatest quarterback to ever live. If you don't have him, you still need stars on offense, don't you?
But where's the comp of, like, if you don't have the great quarterback, then you've got a really good chance to win a Super Bowl because you've got great receivers. Like, I'd argue if you look at the top passing teams last year, the Miami Dolphins, good. You're good-ish, but you're not great. You can't beat good teams. Dallas Cowboys, you'll huck the ball all over the yard. You're good. You can't beat good teams. The Eagles are paying two receivers. That whole thing took a left turn and flew off of a cliff. Meantime, who's consistently good right now? The Niners are consistently good. The Ravens are consistently good. The Chiefs are consistently good. These teams don't have anything going on basically outside of Deebo in terms of salary at the wide receiver position. So I hear what you're saying, Grandy. That's fair. Yeah, Brady, Mahomes, maybe it's that simple. But I don't see this thing that suggests to me that the equation is that easy. I've got a $30 million receiver, therefore I'm going to be good. Maybe if you got a bunch of other stuff going on really good too.
Yeah, it usually doesn't work that way. But to Grandy's point, if you don't have a very, very good elite quarterback, then you got to have something on offense. And a lot of times, like Minnesota's in that spot where you don't have the elite quarterback. So you've got a wide receiver who not only will help put butts in the seats, but at least your mediocre quarterback can get him the football, and you hope that he single-handedly can kind of keep you in some games by making plays. You got to go one direction or the other on offense. If you don't have a good quarterback, you got to have a good something, right?
I don't know, man. I mean, the last few years, the Los Angeles Chargers had who's supposed to be an elite quarterback, and they were paying 2 receivers, and they can't get to the playoffs. They can't win a playoff game. And they just dumped both. Harbaugh walked in there and went, get rid of both of them. Get them out of here. See ya.
Yeah.
Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, go. We're moving in a completely different direction. And now people think that they're going to be better. He went in and got rid of all the skill position players. He kept Herbert. That's it.
That's right. And I do think about Green Bay, and I made this point last week or the week before about the way they're going about constructing their roster by young, cheap tight ends and wide receivers, and now their quarterback, who is reportedly going to hold out when camp is getting started this week until he gets a contract, and they're all saying, well, it's going to be a short holdout because he's getting paid, and so Jordan Love's going to get 50, 52, 55 million a year, whatever it is, and that's okay because all their receivers and their tight ends are on rookie deals.
Buffalo made a huge swing to get a big-name wide receiver and gave him a very big contract, and then they played for a few years. They were unable to get over the top and decided he was now worth the headache. Get him out of there. I don't even – who's the Buffalo's receiving core this year? Who is it? I don't even know. I honestly don't. Who is a wide receiver for the Bills this year?
I'm looking it up.
Is Curtis Samuel on that team this year?
Yep.
Okay. Who else?
Juan Samuel? Former infielder.
First-round pick, wide receiver Keon Coleman.
Okay, Keon Coleman. All right.
Khalil Shakir, you remember him?
Yes.
Chase Claypool was a signing for them this offseason.
Oh, God.
They got MVS.
Oh, do they? They got Marquez Valdez.
First signing of the week.
Stop it. Yeah, now does anybody think the Bills are going to stink?
No, because they have an elite quarterback.
Okay. So do they?
I think so.
All right.
I think every example you're bringing up, Willard, is because a team gets to a point where they have to choose between their star quarterback or their star receiver, and they're clearly every single time going to choose their star quarterback. Justin Herbert, you're choosing your star quarterback over your two wide receivers.
But those guys were already getting paid. So obviously you could have both. You could. Justin Herbert and Mike Williams and Keenan Allen were all getting paid. Justin signed his deal a year ago.
And you have absolutely no flexibility to anything else in the future.
Fair.
The Buffalo Bills ultimately got to a point where they had to say, all right, well, we want to help ourselves reset with Josh Allen for the rest of his career. We don't want Stephon Diggs around, plus he's a little bit of a distraction.
Right.
You're just choosing your star quarterback, and maybe that's what the Niners are going to ultimately do because they know they got to pay Brock at some point.
That's part of it, but the part that's still being left out to me is where we've got data that suggests breaking off wide receivers at $30 million a year is going to equate somehow to winning. I'm not spending any time right now saying that receivers aren't important. I'm not saying that. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that if you're going to start giving them $30 to $35 million a year, that is going to weaken you at other positions, and I think that's a bad bet. Obviously, you're going to have to do it sometimes. The Niners felt the need to do it with Deebo Samuel. Many have felt the need to do it with certain players. But I am not bullish on the teams that are like, let's do it with two. This is going to mess with the Eagles. This is going to mess with them at some point. And they're going to have to work their way out of some of those contracts at a certain point.